Well, greetings. I've been asked by a number of folks on several occasions to record a brief video on the life of Bonaventure Broderick. My biography, The Remarkable Life of Bishop Bonaventure Broderick, Exile, Redemption, and a Gas Station, was published last November by Seraph Press. And I think by way of introduction, I'll read the back cover for a couple reasons. Number one, it gives a highlight, if you will, of some of the uninvited controversies that surrounded the bishop and led to his 35 years of exile from the church before his happy reconciliation through the efforts of then Archbishop Francis Spellman. But it also demonstrates very clearly how his life was stranger than fiction. Mark Twain once wrote through the person of Pudd'nhead Wilson that the truth is stranger than fiction because fiction is obliged to stick to probabilities, whereas the truth is not. So, from the back cover, a Catholic bishop running a gas station? Well, that was a story they told in Millbrook, New York, and it turned out to be true. But the gas station is hardly the most interesting thing about this fascinating character. His is a story of catacombs in Rome, a failed bomb building business in Connecticut, and a sewer system in Cuba. It is a story of allegations from the serious to the sensational to the silly, that he shared in $1 million commission to sell church property in Havana, that he was living with a nun he stole from a convent in St. Louis, that he was running a hot dog stand in upstate New York. It is the story of a millionaire Congregationalist and his Catholic wife, an impeached governor of New York, quarreling siblings and quibbling church hierarchy. It is a tale of popes and politicians, business partners who throw inkwells at each other, and a lawyer who probes into a private papal conversation on behalf of a cardinal of the church. Strange, moving, funny, mysterious, exciting, this is a story that has fascinated Catholics for years. This is the first book that sifts through the evidence, digs into the mysteries, sorts the true from the false, and tells the whole story of the gas station bishop from Millbrook. So a couple things. Let me address the gas station first because that's really an interesting feature of his life. And if you look on the internet, you'll find articles there and elsewhere that claim that the bishop ran a gas station in Millbrook, New York for 30 or even 40 years. He did not. My research indicates that it was probably 4 or 5 years. That most likely he opened a gas station in 1935. So he owned a gas station for maybe 4 or 5 years in Millbrook, New York, until 1939 when he was happily reconciled with the church through the efforts of then Archbishop Francis Spellman, future cardinal of the church. Also, it's interesting to me that here we have a bishop of the church exiled for 35 years, still in good standing, but without an assignment from 1905 to 1939, who's involved in a number of secular vocations throughout that period of time to earn a living. In 1912, though, he's on the front page of the New York Times. He almost single-handedly has William Salzer, the governor of New York, impeached in 1912. So he's on the front page of the New York Times. He's not hiding from publicity. In every instance where he has the opportunity, it's well known wherever he's living that he's a bishop of the Catholic Church. He's a clergyman. But no one has really dug into this life before in such detail. And while I appreciate the opportunity, and it is a privilege to have spent 2 years of research into his life, I hope that the biography does a service, a twofold service. First of all, to the legacy of Bishop Broderick, to clear up any controversy that surrounded his life. And secondly, as a service to the church, because during his 35 years of exile, he never spoke ill of the church, and it seems that he harbored very few resentments. And so, in that regard, I hope that the biography does a service. I think I'd like to share a couple items that are in the book, one of which is something that the bishop wrote in his notebook in 1941. In 1901, Helen Bolin, who was a former nun who had professed temporary vows at a convent, discerned that she no longer had a calling to the religious life, and she left to move to New York to care for Bishop Broderick's elderly mother, Margaret Broderick, who was in need of a caregiver and a companion. And her name was Helen Boland. Helen Boland stayed with Margaret Broderick from 1901 to her death, to Mrs. Broderick's death in 1917. After that, she stayed on as Bishop Broderick's housekeeper until 1939, when he was happily reconciled with the church. Helen Boland then moved to an apartment in New York City until her death in 1946. But in 1941, Bishop Broderick wrote in his notebook a recollection of the scene at his mother's deathbed in 1917, and here it is. 2 days before her death, my mother lapsed into a comatose condition. Summoned by telegraph from a distance of about 400 miles, I traveled by automobile day and night until I reached her bedside. Almost immediately, my mother regained consciousness, opened her eyes, and greeted me lovingly. Helen was kneeling on one side of the bed. Turning to Miss Boland, she thanked her for her long years of affectionate care to her, told her what a kind and dutiful son I had always been, assuring her that I had never caused her any sorrow, and asked Miss Boland to care for me as carefully as she had for her. Then, turning to me, she exacted a promise from me that I would always protect and care for Helen. This promise I cheerfully and sincerely gave. Within an hour, my mother's soul left this earth for its home in heaven. And again, he wrote that in 1941 regarding his mother's death in 1917. I'd also like to read a portion of a letter that Archbishop Spellman wrote to the apostolic delegate Amleto Ciccognani shortly after Spellman visited Broderick. Spellman made a nearly secretive meeting to Millbrook, New York, to meet with Bishop Broderick in 1939, shortly after Spellman was consecrated Archbishop of New York. And this is where the reconciliation takes place. And here's a portion of the letter that Spellman wrote describing that meeting. I knocked on the door, and it was opened by a man of about 70 years of age, dressed plainly in rough clothes. I took it for granted that it was the bishop. I said, "Good afternoon, Dr. Broderick. I am Archbishop Spellman, and I heard that you were here, and I thought I would come to see you and ask you if there was anything I could do to help you." Immediately and spontaneously came his answer. "I have been waiting for 30 years for someone to say those words to me." I entered the house and sat down and told him that if he would like to tell me his story, that I would be pleased to hear it, as I knew nothing about him or the cause of his difficulties. I knew only that he was a Catholic bishop, and I wanted to help him if I could. And help him he did. He reconciled him with the church, and within months appointed him chaplain of the Sherver Hospital and Home in Riverdale, New York. 2 weeks later, Bishop Broderick wrote to Spellman regarding that visit. This is a portion of the letter. "Even if no further benefit were to result to me from it, I would still always regard it as the most remarkable experience of my life. Never was there brought to my attention in any way an action more Christ-like or more noble. Every detail and incident of it, every word and look we exchanged shall always remain impressed on my memory as long as I live. You have done much to restore my badly shaken confidence in human nature. Fortunately, I have never permitted bitterness to lodge in my soul. Divine grace has never allowed my faith in God to be weakened. Through all the years of my misery, my constant and fervent prayer has been, 'God is good.' I would like to believe that it was in answer to that prayer that he inspired you to visit me and speak to me in the way you did last Tuesday." And finally, I'd like to read a portion of a letter that Spellman's old friend Richard Cushing, who was then recently consecrated auxiliary bishop of Boston, wrote to Spellman in December of 1939. And this is in response to Spellman sending Cushing a copy of the letter that he sent to Amleto Ciccognani, the apostolic delegate, that I read a portion of a few moments ago. This is Cushing responding to Spellman. "I am returning a letter in regard to Dr. Broderick. What a beautiful act of charity you performed. I have never read anything that made such a profound impression on me. As I frequently said, the hand of the Lord is upon you. To me, you have started a new era in the hierarchy of this country, an era of heart that will bring souls nearer to their spiritual leaders, May God give you the strength to carry on. And so, in closing, I'd like to share a couple photographs that I have that did not make it into the book. But here is Archbishop Spellman with the Apostolic Dello Amuleto Cicognani in 1939 on the eve of Spellman's consecration as Archbishop of New York. And finally, a photograph of Archbishop Spellman with Bishop Broderick standing to his immediate right. And this picture was taken shortly after Broderick's reconciliation with the church. I think it was Memorial Day of 1940. So I hope that brief glance at Bishop Broderick's life is helpful. I hope you'll take a look at the biography. And if you do, I hope you enjoy meeting Bishop Bonaventure Broderick. Thank you.